World leaders are extending their condolences to Iran after the country's president, foreign minister, and other government officials died in a helicopter crash on Sunday. NPR's Aya Batrawi reports their aircraft went down near Iran's border with Azerbaijan.
Arab leaders offered statements of condolences to Iran following the death of President Ebrahim Raisi and other senior officials aboard the helicopter that crashed. Iran's regional proxies and allies, however, used their statements to cast Raisi as a martyr and hero of Muslim causes. Raisi was a conservative cleric seen as a possible successor to Iran's supreme leader. In Lebanon, where 3 days of mourning have been declared, the Iran-backed Hezbollah group described Raisi as a firm defender of Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem and protector of, quote, resistance movements and their fighters. A spokesperson for the Iran-backed Houthi group in Yemen similarly said Raisi was committed to the Palestinians. Gaza's Hamas group issued a statement commending Iran's support for Palestinian resistance.
Hi, welcome to a special edition of the Analysts with Jake Novak. And this is a special breaking news edition because, of course, of that very, very big news over the weekend. The helicopter crash in Azerbaijan, or just east of Azerbaijan in Iran, killing the president of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, also the foreign minister of Iran, some other dignitaries on that helicopter that crashed. It took about 12, 14, 15 hours for the wreckage to be found. They found it. The bodies were burned beyond recognition. And that, of course, ended a lot of the mystery about what had happened to that helicopter. It also ended another drama that was playing out that I noted right away, which was that chopper went down in an area where there are a lot of Kurdish strongholds. And I kept thinking to myself, and I mentioned this and I wrote about it, that if there were any survivors of that chopper crash, especially President Raisi, it would be interesting to see what would happen if the Kurds got to the crash site before the Iranians did. But it turned out to be a moot argument. It doesn't seem like anyone survived for any length of time after the crash. And of course, the Iranians got to the crash site first. I don't want to go too much into the cloak and dagger of all of this, but we can't move on without acknowledging it just a little bit. This is an odd instance. Listen, helicopters do crash more often than jets and planes. I understand that. But to have a helicopter where the president and the foreign minister are on that helicopter and it still crashes, there is certainly a decent chance that there was some sabotage involved. There's certainly a chance that there was some kind of maybe even an attack on the helicopter involved. That cannot be ignored, and it shouldn't be ignored. So it may take a very long time before we can find that out, whether there was some kind of foul play, that kind of stuff. And we, as people trying to find out the answer to that mystery, can't really go on with those theories until we get a little bit more evidence. But Iran can go on. The nation of Iran, the government of Iran, the policies that they pursue, that can continue, even though they may not know all the details. But it can't continue with the utmost confidence. In other words, if there are people in the Iranian government who either sabotaged that helicopter, who either allowed somebody else to sabotage the helicopter, or if it was attacked from the ground, informed anti-government rebels or dissident groups that where the chopper was going to be and when. Obviously, the Iranian government can't move ahead with full confidence, but they can move ahead with their day-to-day work. And then right now, they have quite a lot of work to do, because one of the things I want to talk about is you're going to see, and you've already seen, if you're watching this, you've probably already seen on TV, a lot of people pouring cold water on what this means for Iran. They may say something along the lines of, well, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, is still the supreme leader. He's still there. Yes, he's old. Yes, he's reportedly quite sick, but he still sets the tone. I don't deny that. And they'll say that it doesn't really matter who gets into these other positions because the policies will be the same. Well, the policies may be the same, folks, but it matters. It really matters. If you want to understand what the position of president is in Iran in a corporate type lingo, Raisi and all the presidents of Iran are basically a COO, a chief operating officer, but they're kind of a quasi-CEO as well. The Ayatollah Khamenei is kind of like the chairman He definitely sets the tone. He definitely is the quote unquote supreme leader. He definitely has the power to veto things or to initiate things. But the actual day-to-day running of the Iranian regime is done by the president. So I would really say he is the CEO. Raisi was the CEO. He was certainly the COO. And the foreign minister was like the chief information officer, which, depending on the corporation we're talking about, can be a very important position. In Iran, that's a very, very important position because the CIO, the marching orders, the words, the messaging to especially Iran's proxy terror armies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis, is very important. So these are two big losses for the Iranian regime. Do not be fooled by the people saying this won't make a difference, that there are people who can easily be putting into the slots. That's not true. These are people that are the points of contact for Iran's #1 product, which is terror wars all over the world. It's not going to be easy to get someone up to speed in time who also has the loyalty. I don't care what kind of regime you're talking about. When there's a job like that available, there's a lot of people who want it. Power abhors a vacuum, and there isn't just going to be one person who's just going to waltz on into the job without somebody saying something publicly or privately about it. That's not how it works in human nature. All right. So this is not going to be something that people can just absolutely easily fix and change. It's going to take a while for all of Iran's operations to get back up to speed, and they may never get back completely up to speed. I want people to know who Ebrahim Raisi was and why he was more than just a president, because Iran's had a number of presidents here and there, some of whom more important than others. This guy, Raisi, was a really important president. He was the closest of all the presidents of Iran as far as his close relationship was with the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. It's not going to be easy for him to find someone he's just as close with. Some people have mentioned Ayatollah Khamenei's son is very likely to take that position, but that, again, easier said than done. And I think if his son was more capable, he would have been in a bigger job by now, if you know what I mean. I don't think he may not be the sharpest tool in the shed. So there's that to consider. And that we've heard from some intelligence agencies over the years, even though he certainly supports his father and will probably do anything he says. The problem is his father's old and sick, and his father can't say every little thing he wants all the time. He's not really built for that anymore. Raisi was a protege and extremely close to Khamenei for a very, very long time. He was known as the Butcher of Tehran. He was the hatchet man, almost literally, during the early days of the regime, the middle years of the regime. He was famous for initiating and presiding over literally 5-minute trials, capital trials, where everyone was found guilty and killed. There are tens of thousands of Iranians that Raisi was responsible for killing. Now, that's significant, not just because we should be happy that such a terrible terrorist leader who had his own hands dirty, he wasn't just a leader of a country that sponsors and conducts terror wars, proxy terror wars. He himself was a killer. He himself had direct, it's kind of like the scene in The Godfather, where there are a lot of buffers between Michael Corleone and the button men. There was no buffer between Raisi and the people that were ordered to be killed. Raisi ordered them to be killed, and they were killed. There was no buffer between him and someone else making that decision. So this is important to understand because, again, it makes it very hard to replace him. This is a guy who has had an intimate knowledge for his entire life of the way that regime works. He's someone who was completely unapologetic about things. So he felt very, very much convinced that what they were doing was right, even though it's really quite evil. And again, hard to replace. People need to understand it's not going to be easy to replace him. And so this all brings me to where we are right now. You're seeing a lot of headlines, especially on the regular news channels, talking about what does Iran do next? Look, folks, again, you'll see me do this a lot on this program. There are political consultants. I think political consultants, as in general, and the industry in general, is incompetent and not very good. Also very bad are the people who run these newsrooms and decide what stories to go with. I don't know if you're a viewer watching television news in the United States, an American viewer, why you care so much about what Iran does next. What we should be caring about, and not only if you're looking for a news audience in the United States, but if you really want to understand where there really is a major question for the whole world, is what the United States does next. Now, again, Iran can move on without its president and foreign minister right now. It's not like they can't try, but they are in a form of disarray. Somebody asked me if it's chaos. I think disarray is a couple notches better than chaos. It could descend into chaos. I mean, if another shoe drops, if the supreme leader dies or becomes completely incapacitated, if there is some kind of major protest movement that takes to the streets that, like we've seen in Iran over the years. We saw one in 2009. We saw it in 2019 going into 2020. That could go to a situation where we get to absolutely chaos. But until that point, they can try to make their best effort for it. The real question, folks, is not what Iran does now. Again, that's an important question, but that's not the thing I would put in front of my American viewers. And that's not the number one question. The number one question is, what does the United States do now that Iran is in this form of disarray? Now, unfortunately, we've gotten some answers so far what the Biden administration thinks it should do. Just today, we saw that the State Department and NATO doesn't do anything that the United States doesn't approve pretty much. But more importantly, the State Department sent an official condolence to the Iranian regime over the death of Raisi and the foreign minister. An official condolence for the death of the butcher of Tehran. An official condolence for a man who had a direct hand in the killing of hundreds of American troops in the Gulf War. An official condolence for someone who has started and had a very direct hand in the October 7th attacks on Israel. Some of the worst atrocities in human history, and certainly recent human history. And we sent an official condolence. And before you pull out of your hat that's standard procedure when a leader of a foreign country dies, baloney. We didn't send an official condolence to Admiral Donitz when Hitler killed himself. We didn't send an official condolence to the Sunnis of Iraq when Saddam Hussein was hanged. We didn't send a condolence when other evil people were killed throughout history. That's not something that the United States has always done. We were under no requirement to do so. And I think the reason why is very simple. And this is something that I've talked about and written about. You can check my record, both recent and long term. Folks, we have to come to this understanding, and this is not a conspiracy theory. This is based on open policies that we've seen for years now. The Biden administration, both the White House and the State Department, is strewn with pro-Iranian sympathizers and agents. People who basically are so pro-Iran that they have allowed for incredibly, just absolutely unjustified policies towards Iran. This started with the Obama team, which is the same team as the Biden team when it comes to foreign policy. There's been no real changes, just some of the people at the top. But this is the same foreign policy team that's been in place since Barack Obama was elected in 2008. One of the first things he did, even weeks before he was inaugurated in 2009, still in 2008, he sent out overtures to the Iranian regime to try to create a friendship with them. Then in 2009, when the first of widespread pro-democracy protests broke out in Iran, Barack Obama, as president at that point, said nothing to support it, nothing about it. He never talked about it until the Iranians had brutally put it down, and then he made some comments about it. And then, of course, Barack Obama expended all of the political capital, whatever capital he had when he was reelected. Because remember, Barack Obama in 2012 became the first president in the United States to be reelected with a smaller percentage of the popular vote and a smaller number of electoral college votes for the second term than he had in his first. So he didn't have a lot of political capital when he was reelected, but he certainly had some, and he expended all of it for the Iran nuclear deal, which, of course, the key factor in the Iran nuclear deal, because they didn't change their nuclear policy. We know they cheated. The key factor was the transferring of hundreds of billions of dollars to the Iranian regime. These kinds of policies don't happen without strong pro-Iranian sympathizers in the administration. I also believe, because I'm also talking about human nature here, that when you transfer hundreds of billions of dollars from point A to point B, the people who help facilitate that get a cut. Okay, this is human nature 101. If you don't understand how business works, you can excuse yourself from this part of the equation. Now, I'm not going to name names until I get real hard documentation of this, but honestly, these things just don't happen unless someone is getting a cut of it. That's what happens, okay? But even if you don't believe that part of it, certainly there are Iranian sympathizers in the State Department. Are they really super pro-Iranian? No, they're probably more motivated by their hatred of Israel and hatred of traditional U.S. values and traditional U.S. policy in the region, which I openly admit has been wrong many times. The U.S. foreign policy, there's no aspect of U.S. foreign policy since World War II that hasn't been fraught with a lot of errors. There have been some great successes. I would say Japan is one. And I would say that in some ways, Israel is one as well, because this is a country that has absolutely made life better in the region that it lives in. For those of you who are pulling your hair out over this, understand, the Palestinians are actually richer and are a larger population than they were in 1948 when the state of Israel was created. They're actually better off with the Israelis there, no matter which way you see it. Again, a lot of you watching this probably think that's crazy, but look at the numbers before you have an emotional reaction. Anyway, this is our opportunity. Sadly, I'm already pouring cold water on that because we do have an opportunity at this point, while the Iranian regime is in this form of disarray, to do something about it peacefully. This would be the time, if we didn't have these pro-Iranian sympathizers and agents in our State Department and in our White House. This would be the time to reimpose the sanctions. This would be the time to turn the screws on all the other financial rivers flowing into Iran and peacefully, underline peacefully, institute some form of regime change in Iran that the people want. President Joe Biden, if he had any shame, and Anthony Blinken, if he had any shame, should be mortified this morning. They should be absolutely embarrassed all the way up and down, because even with that repressive regime in Iran, when the news hit the people of Iran and the streets of Iran that Raisi was dead, there were widespread celebrations. People were shooting off fireworks. This is no small thing, folks. You can get killed for that. People do get killed for that. Do you know that when the Iranian thugs shoot the protesters in the streets, when they shot them to death in 2019, they went to the homes of their families, their surviving families, and forced them to pay for the bullets used to kill their loved ones? I kid you not. This is all documented by a number of human rights organizations, and I wrote about it at the time. So when you shoot off a firework and you celebrate publicly and you shout in the streets that you're happy that the president of Iran has been killed, you're not just showing what your true feelings are, you're risking your life to do it. It's a significant demonstration of the real feelings of the Iranian people. And if I'm Joe Biden, if I'm Barack Obama or Anthony Blinken or John Kerry or Hillary Clinton or all the people who worked for the Iran deal, all the people who have pushed for some form of appeasement and engagement with this regime, if I had any shame, I would be ashamed. Because it's one thing to say you're going to support this problematic regime because you believe in that theory that balancing things out in the Middle East between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran is somewhat a good idea, even though there's a lot of moral trade-offs you have to make. Okay, maybe you believe that. But that doesn't work anymore when you find out that most of the people of Iran don't want this regime either. So the question is, who are you balancing this for? You're balancing it for a relatively small cabal of thugs in Iran who don't even have the support of their own people in favor of strong allies like the US, in favor of an ally that's been moving in the right direction for years like Saudi Arabia, which still has a long way to go. But compared to 10 years ago, it's been night and day in Saudi Arabia. And we're going to support Iran instead of them when their own people don't want it? This should be a moment of absolute shame for anyone who continues to promote the Iran deals, anyone who says that nonsense about the money that we've sent over to Iran being Iran's money. No, it's not. It's the people of Iran's money. We're handing over to the regime, which is suppressing the people to the point that they're celebrating in the streets and risking their own lives to do so when the president dies, to send their money that they earned, either working in the oil industry or some of their other industries, to that same regime that's oppressing them. To call it insanity would be an insult to insane people. It's not insanity, sadly. In some ways, I kind of wish it were. It's not insanity. It's treason. It's pro-Iranian sympathizers who hate Israel so much and hate America so much in positions of power in this government who continue to pursue this ruinous policy. And their cards were shown to the world last night. Their mistakes were undeniably uncovered last night when it was clear the people of Iran were willing to be happy about the death of this president with whom we felt, well, we have to deal with the Iranian people. It's 80 million people. It's a big country. They have all these resources. No, 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 no. It's just a bunch of thugs who have control over those 80 million people and that resource-filled country. And we don't have to necessarily deal with those thugs. Now, I want everyone to pay attention to one thing that you're going to hear, because you always hear this whenever anything happens in Iran, just for a few moments. When you hear people, anybody, who says that the United States, or even Israel, but especially the United States, should get involved in some kind of military attack on Iran, don't listen to them. A majority of the people calling for this publicly are not being genuine. They're being dishonest. They're trying to catch conservatives or pro-Israel supporters and try to basically get them into trapping them into sounding like warmongers. For the most part, I'm proud to say that most people who want to see regime change in Iran aren't calling for any kind of military attack. And it's not because they're keeping it under their vest. It's because they really don't want it, because we don't need it. We can peacefully get regime change in Iran. And today it got a lot easier, peacefully, without firing a shot. Best thing to do would be to stop sending them so much goddamn money. We're sending them tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. It's outrageous. And again, we're not sending it to the people of Iran. We're not sending it to the industries of Iran. We're sending it to the thugs who run Iran, who use the lion's share of that money to fund terror wars that often leave Americans dead, or Israelis dead, or innocent people of all kinds dead, or cripple our economy. That money, you think the Houthis, who live in a 7th century-like economy in Yemen, are able to use these weapons and get these weapons on their own? No, that's the money that we gave Iran so they could buy those weapons and also help send people over to Yemen to train them how to use it. We're paying for our own destruction by giving this money to this regime. And again, the world just saw another example of how the people of Iran don't even want this regime. The already lame argument that we have to do this because Iran's a big country and this is what the people want has been proven wrong over and over again. And it was shown to be wrong once again last night. So I want everyone to understand that those people calling for war with Iran, I think that they are what you call kind of a false flag operation. Don't believe them. Now, there are some people who actually do want American or Israeli direct war with Iran. A couple of them out there. Senator Lindsey Graham is one of them. I don't think those people also are the sharpest tools in the shed. They're not really thinking clearly. They don't understand. They should read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. The wars that you can win without actually firing a shot or shooting off an arrow or wielding a sword are the best wars that you can fight. And that's one that we can fight in Iran, believe it or not. Even though they're close to having nuclear weapons, even though they have a large army, even though they've been training proxy armies for a long, long time, the fact is no one has ever directly confronted them. They don't want to directly, that's the whole point of their terror proxy armies. They're buffers. If Iran really wanted to do all the mayhem that they caused in the Middle East themselves, they would have. But they don't really know what they're doing there. It'd be very militarily. In the end, it would be easy to defeat them just by choking off their money and working with the dissident groups in Iran who are ready to take over. Most notably, those Kurds that I talked about earlier in this half hour. The Kurds are pro-American. The Kurds are pro-Israeli. We've screwed them, the United States, time after time in different disputes they've had. First with Saddam Hussein, and now with the Iranians. But God bless them, they still want their freedom. They still are a much better entity to deal with in the Middle East. They have control over a lot of Iran's oil and a lot of Iraq's oil, and we buy from them when we can. This would be nice. They certainly are ready to help the machine of Iran's economy move again if there is some kind of regime change. That's just one option, though. I'm not saying we have to help fund or support a Kurd war. Again, I don't think there needs to be a war at all. There wasn't a civil war with a lot of battles fought and tanks blowing up in Iran in 1978 and 79 when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over. For those of you who remember, there was a lot of protests in the streets and a lot of stuff like that, and they got the government to get the heck out of there. It wasn't a huge war in Iran. There was a huge war a couple of years later when they went to war with Iraq, but that wasn't a civil war. That was Iraq trying to take advantage of Iran's new government and their shaky position. We don't have to do that. We just have to do something with the money. But folks, I'm sorry I have to end on a little bit of a down note because the oil markets are telling us what the United States policy is going to be, sadly. For those of you who think that the oil markets haven't moved up or way down since the news of the death of Raisi, and you think that's because, well, they're just going to install somebody else and there'll be no change. You're wrong. That's not why the oil markets aren't moving up and down. The reason why the oil markets aren't moving up, the reason why they're really not moving that much at all on this news is because they know the U.S. policy isn't going to change. They know that the U.S. won't do what I suggested earlier, which is tighten the screws on the sanctions, start the oil embargo in a real way, do other things to slow that river of money that flows into Iran all the time. And the oil traders know darn well that isn't going to happen because they know what I know. And you know it now too, because I've told you. They know that this administration is filled with pro-Iranian. And when I say pro-Iranian, I mean pro-Iranian regime. I only wish they were pro-Iran and the people of Iran, but that's a pipe dream right now. The oil markets know, that this administration supports this Iranian regime, will keep things quiet, especially until they get a new president and a foreign minister, and maybe even well beyond that point. And they know that there will be no actual taking of this opportunity. And whether you love him or hate him, I cannot believe that President Trump, if he were in office right now, would act the same way. I think he would be absolutely taking advantage of this weakness by tightening screws. He probably never would have relieved the sanctions anyway, but I think they would have found new sanctions. And I think he would have found other peaceful ways to pressure this Iranian regime and make it easier for the people of Iran to rise up and do something about this in a way very similar to they did 45 years ago or so when the Iranian regime fell, before, with the Shah's regime fell, and we had Ayatollah Khomeini come into power. Folks, that's the sad thing, but still, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to know what all the scenarios are. You do have an Iran that's politically in disarray right now. They may come through it. It's a shame that we won't put pressure on it right now to get some positive change. Again, maybe you could just say, well, we don't want regime change, but now that you're in disarray, we need you to divorce yourself from Hamas completely, or we will give you a hard time. And again, we have all the cards on our table right now as being the United States, and Joe Biden and his State Department won't play a single one of them. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't think the oil markets lie. Those are the folks who have skin in the game, and they usually get things at least right for the moment. Sometimes they don't have great predictive abilities, but they know what's going on right now, which is sadly from the Biden administration. There will be no taking advantage of this opportunity for peace and prosperity and just at least some improvement in the Middle East. I hope I have better news for you next time, but we'll see. At the very least, a very terrible, terrible terrorist and butcher and murderer has died, and perhaps we can take some solace in that. I'm Jake Novak. Thanks for watching this very special edition of The Analysts with Jake Novak. We'll be back with our full and our usual political analysis show next time. Again, thanks for watching.
Watch 13 Wham News anywhere on any device with Stir. Download the Stir app and choose Rochester. You get local news and more than 20 other TV channels. And the best part? It's free. Go to your app store and download Stir today.